If you think you have food addiction, sugar addiction, carb addiction, binge eating, compulsive behaviors around ultra-processed foods, this video will shed light on the science behind it and will help you understand it's not a lack of willpower. Before we begin, please be sure to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Let's go. Food addiction is often misunderstood. For many, it's dismissed as a lack of willpower or self-control, but the truth is, it is far more complex. Food addiction involves profound changes in the brain's reward system, this we know, and this creates cycles of compulsion and cravings and overconsumption, and these cycles feel impossible to break. Today's video explores the neuroscience behind food addiction, explaining how dopamine, reinforcement, and tolerance play critical roles. And hopefully by understanding the mechanisms at play, you can begin to take steps towards recovery and release some shame. Dopamine is the brain's feel-good chemical, and it plays a central role in our relationship with food. When you eat, dopamine is released in the Nucleus Accumbens, which is a region of the brain responsible for processing rewards. And unlike whole, natural foods, processed foods are engineered to deliver a massive dopamine surge. And that is why a handful of chips or a slice of pizza can feel so satisfying, while a salad may not feel quite as satisfying at first. Foods high in sugar, fat, and salt are particularly addictive because they overstimulate the brain's reward pathways. And over time, these constant dopamine spikes begin to change how the brain functions, which lays the foundation for addiction. The Nucleus Accumbens is a key player in the brain's reward system. This region processes pleasure and reinforces behaviors, making it central to understanding food addiction. During addictive behaviors like overeating or substance use, the Nucleus Accumbens is flooded with dopamine. Ultra-processed foods trigger this dopamine release, creating a strong association between the food and the feeling of reward. However, the repeated release of large amounts of dopamine, such as through ultra-processed foods and consuming them again and again, that leads to the downregulation of dopamine receptors in the Nucleus Accumbens. And over time, fewer receptors and reduced sensitivity means that the same food provides less pleasure. And to feel okay, you just need to consume more and more and more of that addictive food, which just perpetuates the cycle. Tolerance happens when the brain adapts to the frequent overstimulation from the food. With repeated dopamine surges, your brain reduces the number and sensitivity of dopamine receptors, and that just creates a dangerous cycle. So the same food no longer delivers the same pleasure. You need to eat more of that same food in quantity or with more frequency or both to achieve the same effect. And as tolerance builds, your brain's reward system resets its baseline. You no longer feel normal unless you're eating those highly rewarding foods. And this leads to increased dependency and compulsive overeating. If you're finding this content valuable, please be sure to subscribe to this channel. Now let's continue to positive reinforcement in food addiction. So positive reinforcement occurs when a behavior is motivated by its rewarding effect. So at the start of food addiction, eating hyperpalatable foods like cookies and ice cream or fast food triggers that surge of dopamine, which creates the feelings of comfort and pleasure. So your brain learns to associate these foods with happiness, stress release, and satisfaction, as we were mentioning, and that encourages that person to eat them again and again. And this is early in the cycle. So food addiction may at first feel like a choice. You eat for enjoyment, you eat for comfort, or it's a celebration, right? Later, as food addiction progresses, what is salient is negative reinforcement. So negative reinforcement occurs when a behavior is motivated by the desire to avoid discomfort. It's no longer about getting pleasure, it's avoiding discomfort. So the pleasure of eating actually diminishes, but the need to eat remains. So that shift happens because of the dopamine downregulation that we were talking about. The dopamine receptors become more sparse and less sensitive over time, which makes it difficult to feel the same high. So instead of eating to feel high, we eat to relieve cravings and urges to binge, to escape stress, emotional discomfort, to avoid guilt, to avoid the withdrawal symptoms. And this is when food addiction stops being about wanting and becomes about needing. Conceptually, food addiction can be understood to progress in the following stages. So the first stage might be we're eating for pleasure. Food feels rewarding. You eat for the enjoyment of it, celebration, stress release. Then after that, tolerance develops. And as you eat more hyperpalatable foods, the brain reward system adapts. Dopamine downregulation makes it harder to feel pleasure, leading to increased consumption. The next stage is negative reinforcement is what is predominant. You don't eat to feel good, but you eat to avoid feeling bad. The behavior becomes compulsive, driven by cravings, and emotional distress. And lastly, there's the real loss of control. The limbic system, the emotional brain, dominates, overriding the prefrontal cortex, which is like the executive decision-making brain. And food addiction now feels impossible to stop. Understanding the neuroscience of food addiction makes one thing clear. It is not about weakness or lack of discipline. Food addiction rewires the brain, creating deeply ingrained habits that require very intentional strategies to overcome. Steps to recovery can include abstaining from highly addictive foods to help reset your dopamine system, making sure you're nourishing yourself with appropriate foods, building awareness about your cravings and developing skills on how to cope with them, maintaining social networks, building overall mindfulness in your patterns. All of these things can play a vital role in the recovery process. We've learned that food addiction is a complex interplay of neurochemical, psychological, and behavioral patterns. By understanding how dopamine, reinforcement, and tolerance work, hopefully you can release any shame you may feel and know this is just neuroscience. This is just biology. And also know that you can begin to take control of your eating behaviors. Recovery is possible, and it starts with knowledge, self-compassion, and taking action steps towards change. If you're on your recovery journey and this video speaks to you, please like this video, subscribe to this channel, and leave a comment below. Let's support each other in living our lives healthy and empowered. Until next time.